Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. Today on What the Lux, we're joined by Clint Nagata, the visionary founder and creative partner of Blink Design Group. From his roots in Hawaii to leading a Bangkok-based studio, Clint has redefined luxury hospitality design by weaving cultural narrative into every project. His collaborations with brands like Six Senses and Capella showcase a commitment to both authenticity and emotional resonance. Clint, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's really, really great to have you on the podcast, and gives me great joy to just be able to talk about design, you know, in a context that I'm very familiar with and passionate about, and you've done some amazing work in. So thank you for joining us. Clint, just to start, you left what many would consider to be a dream position. You were one of the youngest partners at WATG to start your own design company in Bangkok, which was a risk, you know. And, you know, Bangkok, it wasn't exactly a design capital at the time, I don't think. It wasn't particularly known for that. You know, what is it that made you make that move?
You know, I guess if I know what I know now currently, I probably wouldn't have made that move. I mean, it was quite a big risk, but I was quite naive in the sense that I just, you know, wanted to do something different. I love the vibrancy of the city. And, you know, growing up in Hawaii, as strange as it may seem, I was just intrigued with traveling. You know, I just always wanted to be elsewhere rather than be at home. And I think that desire to travel really helped, you know, me to think about leaving on my own, because I'm fascinated with culture, with people as well, you know, so that's when I feel like I learn the most, is when you able to reflect upon your own self by understanding where others are coming from.
How did you get into what you do, and what do you do for the listeners?
You know, I applied. I remember applying to WTG out of school, university, and it was a generic ad that said wanted creative individuals. I then learned that the firm was focused on travel, and it wasn't until that point where things sort of started to fall in place.
Yeah.
Fortunately for me, the firm, was going through downsizing, and I soon found myself to be the youngest designer on staff, which meant that I got to work directly with the big bosses. So, you know, having that opportunity and timing really helped me in terms of getting that exposure from the partners. So I was very close to the G in WTG. You know, we would jokingly say that I was his number 2 son. His actually number 1 son, his real son, Wayne, actually worked for the company. So yeah, it was a very momentous time for me, really. I've learned a lot at the firm.
Isn't it wild that there used to be ads that were just creative person required?
Yeah, this is in a newspaper, by the way.
But isn't it like, it's just sort of so amazing when you hear stories like that, because the world is now so different. There's such a high level of specificity around everything, you know. Everyone exists within their tribe and their niche, and, you know, there's so much competition for very, very specific areas of interest.
Right.
And the whimsy of just sort of applying for something and seeing where the path takes you, with just this recognition that what the job entails is a creative mindset and perhaps an openness. God, it's a shame that that's been changed.
They're actually looking for someone much more experienced than me, and I think I just somehow slipped in there, based on a very generic ad. And it's been, you know, really the start of my journey, right? And I owe it to, you know, my previous boss, Ron Mitchell, who sort of saw something in me to hire me back then. I think I told him that I could, you know, work on AutoCAD Release 10, I think, which is the second version of AutoCAD that ever came out. And that's sort of what helped me to get the job. But, you know, things have been much more fortuitous for me since then.
Talk through some of the work you do, some of the key projects, you know, because they're incredible, and it's it'd be good to bring them to life.
It's out of school. I remember working on a few things. being under, a year out of school, and I was already working on the convention center in Hawaii as a lead architect. I had no idea what I was doing. I, it was at that point that I realized it's okay to make mistakes. And at that age, I just didn't know any better, but I kept trying and make a mistake, and I'd, learn from it and hopefully not make the same mistake again. But at that point, I realized that failure is really okay, right? As long as you're able to learn from your mistakes and move on. But I've since then worked on some good projects, both at my old firm and my current firm. I think latest project that we've opened is a Six Senses in Japan, in Kyoto, which even up until today still receives some pretty good accolades. So we're very proud of that.
What's the hook on it? What's the thing that you think makes it special?
I think it's different, but it's familiar, and I think that theme sort of runs throughout our work. That it relates to the sense of place. It's about the temple that's across the street. In terms of bringing on certain aspects of that period from which the temple was originated from. And that's pretty synonymous with our work, no matter what country we're in, whether we're in France. We're doing another Six Senses in France, which is under construction. So these principles or hallmarks really help to define our work.
What's been the change in like Asia's become it's like a sort of epicenter for innovation and hospitality, and I feel that's really changed over the last decade.
Yeah.
How has the market changed from your perspective?
It has changed. I think you see a lot more acceptance of culture. I think previously, a lot of places in the world sort of stayed away from culture, and there's a lot more focus on storytelling, narratives. And I think that helps people relate to a place of which they stay, so that's really helps us to define our work as well. We always try to focus on narratives that are about a particular place. In Japan, in Kyoto, we have two projects, both very different because of the stories of the place and also the brands that they're with.
Yeah, so you created Roku Kyoto,
Right.
and uses sort of Heian era
Right.
philosophy, and it's that rather than the obvious opulence of luxury, and it's something I really believe in as well. It's the understated nature of what it means to have an amazing experience, that's well crafted and connected. How do you define luxury when everyone is sort of trying to outspend each other in this world? That's
Yeah, it's for me. It's about setting a stage, right? And I think you also want people to come back again and again. And the challenge I see with places that are very maximalist, I think they don't date very well. I think they're great the first time you see it, and second time I think you sort of lose interest. As opposed to a place that's more tranquil, calm, understated, you sort of are able to adapt into that feeling depending on your mood. And that's what really resonates with me. These places that are understated, luxurious, and for that reasons they're quite timeless as well.
Do you think we're going to see a sort of global stand against this like gold-plated luxury?
I think we're already seeing it. Right?
Yeah.
I think when you look at the fashion world as well, and their shift towards quiet luxury, that easily transcends to hotels as well and residents as well.
Other than America, where President Trump tried to ban modernist architecture.
Oh, you said that word.
Can we talk about placemaking? You're big into the concept of placemaking, and I think it's incredibly important in the world today because it represents, a mark on the landscape, firstly, concept of a community, and then how you bring people together to live, work, and play, which I think is physically we need to guide people and help people do those things because we live so digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And many claim to placemake, and so what do you think is the sort of difference between placemaking well and just the sort of theatrics of of placemaking?
I think it's a very fine separation between the two. Placemaking or the art of placemaking, whatever you want to call it, it's not something that I, Blink created, obviously. I remember doing it when I first started my career, I guess over 30 years now. At WTG, that was always part of the work and what we did. But now at Blink, I think we have a much more distilled version of it. It's a lot more edited, if you will. So I think this then resonates more with the different audiences, whether you're from that place or you're visiting the place. It's a much more, concise palette of ideas.
How would you define placemaking, actually?
I would define placemaking as relating to a place in terms of drawing out a feeling. It's what we do is really to evoke feeling of a place, right? It's when you go to, whether you're in Milan or in France or throughout Asia, it's about trying to relate to that place. So you feel like you're part of something bigger. That always helps to create unique places.
How do you start that process?
We really start by trying to immerse ourselves into the culture and spending a lot of time listening to our owners. Owners build things for a reason. A lot of it's passion, and it's trying to understand how they see things, as opposed to how a guest to a place would look at something. It's different, right? I was traveling throughout Spain a few weeks ago, and my perception of Spain changed once I went there.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to going there, I've only seen what you see on what's online or what's on TV, which is a very filtered view, more from a tourist perspective, and it's very different or difficult to get that perspective from a local.
The insight comes from the really domestic everyday moment,
Right.
or the nuanced detail, or something that feels every day that you take for granted that's done
Right.
differently. And why it's done differently and what that represents about the culture more broadly always fascinates me.
Yeah.
Not the postcard moment.
No, it's not, and it's exactly true. I mean, what I really appreciate about Spain is actually things that you don't necessarily get to from being online or wherever. It's things that you have to experience. It's those little moments that just make you understand a culture much more clearly.
What are the types of briefs people come to you with? What's the ask when an owner comes to you? What do they say? What's the type of thing they say?
Yeah, the type of brief that I don't like is one that's so open and vague, because if you try to design something with such a carte blanche,
No constraints.
we struggle because there's
Same.
just too many options, right?
Yeah.
I like owners that know they think they know what they want, but it's always about trying to understand what they're not saying.
Yeah.
Not what they're saying, and that's the difference in really trying to adhere to a brief.
Yeah, it's hearing what's not said.
Right.
And playing the therapist,
Right.
I think a lot of the time.
Exactly.
People struggle to articulate themselves when it comes to creativity, but if you can help them figure out where they are today and what their dissatisfaction is, and where they believe they can credibly get to, you can help bridge the two states. I believe.
Yeah, I look at it like they're not. Obviously, they're not. Most of them are not design trained, but obviously, everyone feels they're an expert in hotels because they've stayed in it. But it's about taking that conversation to the next level, right? And really trying to understand also where their backgrounds are, because that gives you a hint into what they like and don't like. But then trying to figure out, trying to guide them down the right path in order to create something that they're satisfied with, right?
But so if I'm in, so how many people who are quite green to the world of hospitality come to you, and what's the 5-step process to owning an amazing place and then turning it into a credible hotel?
Most of our owners are first-time owners.
Yeah.
We don't work for most time we don't work for funds or big corporations. They're well-to-do families, high net worth families that now want to get into.
It's the vanity project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So then there's the art of, trying to, balance what the father wants versus what the wife wants or what the kids want. And we don't always get it right, but it's that process that you have to go through to understand, their different backgrounds and different needs. But we start with the owners, the owners meaning the owners paying for the project. But we also have to listen to the brand. So that's the other part of the equation where you have to ask the brand the right questions. Why this project is important for them, what they envision the project to be like. It's a lot easier to get those answers from the brands, but with owners directly, it's oftentimes not very clear. It's quite gray.
But so they come to you with an asset.
They come to us with an opportunity. They've just purchased a
Yeah.
piece of land. They're thinking of working with, these brands. What do you think? And we try to give them, our thoughts on that, which brands we think could work better for them. We try to understand why, they've bought this particular land, what they like about it, um, and how they see this hotel operating in the future once it's open.
There's just so much locked up in the architecture of a space that's designed to bring people together, isn't there?
Yeah.
The it's like a sort of the whole ancestry of the family,
Right.
is almost sort of represented in this thing that emerges in the built environment, which I think is fascinating. Everyone has so many different preferences, and there's so many biases, no doubt, you have to break when you're thinking about these spaces. But then there are also presumably some non-negotiables, in the the operational aspects of what it takes to build operate a hotel and make it functional. And how involved are you in that part of it as well, the sort of front stage versus the backstage?
We're very involved in that front stage. Obviously, we want to create hotels that are operational. I had a funny recent mock-up room review in Thailand last week, where we created two mock-up rooms. One was more of a standard layout. The other one was quite different, and on plan it looked great. The owner loved it in the renderings, but when we walked through it, he was like, "Oh, this is not going to work." um, but having said that, I still like that mock-up room better, although it's not the most practical. I think it would have been quite well received by the guest. But his thing was that he wants to create things that don't create operational nightmares in the future. So I get his point, but we'll try it again. We'll try that something as different as what we did there elsewhere in other projects.
I mean, you've kind of built Blink to sort of 30 million plus, sort of sizable business. And you've done that by saying no to a lot of things, to a lot of sort of conventional luxury norms. How do you convince people into your vision, and how do you balance, the things that that they like that might be fleeting with what you believe is timeless?
We always go back to the idea of creating a very strong narrative. I find that with most of our clients, if they're able to articulate themselves to their friends what their project is about, they're quite happy. Then they're able to follow the vision and explain it. If they can't explain it, then they tend to get quite lost. So we always pay a lot of attention to the narratives, create things that relate to them as well as a client.
How do you play back a narrative to a client? What format?
It's 2D. It's mostly mood boards and it's renderings. Not many words, because I think it's a lot to tell us. It's easy to tell a story through images, but the story needs to connect, the place, the brand, and the owner. And when I say place, like if we're doing a project in Phuket, it's not just Thailand, it's not just Phuket, but it's that particular part of the island where the project is. So you really have to, drill down to a specific location. Then it makes it more relevant, which then helps create a stronger tie to the design and to the brand.
What are the emerging signals in luxury that you think people should be thinking about?
Nowadays, there's still a very strong focus towards wellness.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it gets misconstrued or misexplained, but wellness is definitely, part of what we have been doing a lot more recently.
Then, just out of interest, so you're based proudly in Bangkok, and it's not a place that you immediately just associate with what you do, and so has that played to your advantage, and how has that given you a different perspective perhaps to those you compete with?
Yeah, Bangkok's a good base, but I, get a lot of my inspirations from my travel. Last year I think I did about 50 trips last year, I think, so it's quite a lot.
It's one a week.
Almost one a week, yeah. It was a lot more before COVID, so if you can imagine that.
Yeah.
But having the ability or the opportunity to see things really helps. Just whether I was in Spain or previously before that in India, or the US, even just to see different things, meet different people.
Yeah. I find also similarly travel seemingly endlessly, although your face seems to manage, would suggest that you seem to manage jet lag better than I do. Do you retain the knowledge I feel I retain a lot of the emotional
Mm.
capital that's generated by travel and by seeing things, and
Yeah.
perhaps less of the intellectual capital. If that makes sense.
It's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I get the part about the emotional part. And that's really hard to explain to our team members, right? On that experience in that way. But we invest in our people, so we send them on travel grant or travel scholarships. We're sending someone to the World Expo in Osaka.
Mm.
She'll go there for a week, and then stay at the Six Senses, stay at Roku. So it's really valuable that people or designers see these places, and it's something that I can't explain to them verbally. That they have to go experience it yourself, right?
What are the sort of differences in Western and Eastern hospitality philosophy?
That's a good question. I think the perception is that Eastern hospitality is much at a higher level, I guess you could say that. But having spent the time in Spain, I'm not sure I would agree. I think it just depends on the country, depends on the city or location, but it's just different ways of approaching hospitality. I like the fact that in Spain, at least when we were there, they're very, very warm, very life loving, and I think you get similar characteristics in Thailand,
Hmm.
which is one of the reasons that I was drawn to Thailand.
What are the things that keep you up at night?
Design problems that I can't solve. I have this habit of if I'm in the middle of designing something, I'll sometimes wake up at 4 o'clock and because an idea hit me and I had to sort of work it out, then I'll try to go back to sleep. But it's when I can't figure out what the solution is before I go to bed, it usually wakes me up at night.
What's your creative process? How do you try and work problems out?
I always looked at design as solving problems, right? And to get to a result. So it's spending a lot of time in the planning phases of it in terms of drawing plans, making sure that spatially it's correct, proportions of bathrooms to living spaces, that sort of thing. And then later on, layer on the aesthetics part, the look, the mood, the feel.
What's your view on sort of sustainability in design and sustainability in luxury, and the
Yeah,
contrast that exists within those words?
that's probably on my least favorite question, sustainability.
Yeah.
I think in our business it's really tough because it's not the most sustainable business to begin with.
Yeah.
But we try to take a more long-term approach where, if you can design a product that's very timeless, the idea is that you would need to renovate less in the future as you go along. So, the fact that we try to design timeless products and reduce the amount of of reconstruction or refurbishment that's needed in the future will help with the idea of being sustainable. But
Yeah.
also we try to source locally, source if we're doing a project in India, we try to make sure that the stones come from India, they don't come from Italy, and elsewhere like that as well. Just try to design with local materials in mind.
You're kind of known, Clint, for challenging the status quo. What are your perhaps controversial beliefs about your industry?
I think there's a belief that if you're building a luxury hotel or designing a luxury hotel, that there are unlimited budgets, which I think is, and oftentimes, far from the truth. Obviously, clients want to feel like it's luxurious, and there's always a conflict of, well, but I don't want to spend $1 million to make it look like $1 million. Um, and that's where the art of design comes in, and trying to give that perception that this is an amazingly expensive space, when in reality you didn't spend half as much to get that result, right?
Yeah, I agree. What drives you?
What drives me?
What drives you to do what you do every day? What are the things that make you sort of excited about the future?
I always have this desire that, or this feeling that um, our next project is our next best project is right around the corner, as opposed to someone that sort of is happy with what I did in the past. I've always been more excited about what we'll do next. And I always have a hard time answering the question when someone says, "What's your best project?" I always say it's the next one, because I always feel like you never, as a designer, you never really get to where you want to be.
Yeah,
There are
trust
always
me.
better ideas,
I feel
right?
the same. I hate it when people ask me what's your favorite work.
Right?
But also it's the context,
Yeah.
The problem with answering that question, which is an impossible question to answer, is firstly it's dissatisfaction with how things are that leads you to do what's next,
Mm,
which is important, for anyone in
mm,
your or my role. It's really understanding like the problem that you're solving through design. As you mentioned earlier, it's problem solving really. You can never really understand a problem unless you've sort of gone on a journey to really familiarize yourself with the context and constraints within which that problem needs to be solved.
Yeah, I guess the other thing for me, it's always been more about the journey than the end result.
Mm.
The journey that we take with our clients on projects, and none of these journeys have ever been the same. In my past 30 years of doing what I do, but I've always been very excited about taking that new journey with a new client,
Yeah.
or even with the same client. Same client, different journey, and that these journeys really help me to understand or see more about myself and force me to grow. So if I had to do the same thing over and over again, I don't know how I would do it. I think I would just be quite unhappy.
If Blink disappeared tomorrow, gone, what legacy would you like to leave within your industry? How do
Yeah.
you like to be known?
So Blink was created not around my name, right? It's never been about Clint, and it's always been about creating a brand that stood for something, and it's a collective voice that is more interested in for me. So to have the company still exist and still thrive, or in fact do better than when I handed it over, if that ever gets to that point, or when it gets to that point, that would make me more satisfied than retiring and closing the shop, because I was no longer involved.
What do you think is an overrated trend in hospitality?
I think the idea that you need to have these spaces that are just maximalist. That you do need to fill every niche with something, or have rooms that are quite over the top. I think that trend is quite not appealing to me.
And what are the cities that excite you when it comes to hospitality innovation?
I think you see a lot of things that are happening in the Middle East, like in Saudi Arabia, or even in Dubai. I think they're really trying to push the envelope in that part of the world. But also, I think in Asia, there are still a lot of nice things that are in development. And I also see things coming up nowadays in Europe as well. I think Europe has been quite slow in that regards, but I think you'll see more things in the next few years that'll be quite nice.
Are there any predictions you have about uncomfortable predictions you have about where luxury hospitality is heading?
That's a hard one. Uncomfortable trends. I think there's a danger that the exclusivity level sort of excludes too many people, and that becomes too exclusive. I think that's a trend that is quite worrisome. I think that to some degree luxury should be available on a general, more broader perspective, and not just limited to the 1% of the world. I think there's enough opportunity to create things for everyone, right? And luxury in the sense that you make people feel special is that makes sense to me.
Clint, I'm going to Bangkok in November to speak for a hotel conglomerate, and I'm going to stay at the Capella. And can you just describe? And that's a standout hotel. What's the philosophy behind it?
Capella, it's an interesting concept. When you go there, the receptionist is off to the side in a separate room. But generally speaking, it's still very accessible. There's some great restaurants and bars, great view on the river. I think I'm sure you'll have fun. And next door there's Four Seasons, which also does very well. Yeah.
How do you like? Do you think about like light, sound, sonics when you're like designing spaces, or do you work with people to help sort of bring to life a space in that respect?
Lighting is very critical,
Yeah.
in terms of giving a proper ambiance. We work with some of the best lighting designers to help create different moods. So I think light's very key in luxury design. Sound, we don't deal too much with sound, but I think obviously public spaces, you need that background music, or restaurants as well, which really helps to set the tone. But I think the one that's missing is, or often not so thought about, is smell. The idea of smell or scent, for me, has always helped to trigger memories, or to associate a particular place or moment, with a fragrance or a smell.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the most powerful impact on emotion and memory structure,
Right.
and it's neglected. I was reading, interestingly, Francis Kirkhidan. I can never pronounce the second part of that brand's name, but just worked at Air France to re-release a scent, and it's what famously was so successful about Singapore Airlines. Well, this focus on materiality, senses. In Western culture, in particular, we just overlook that stuff.
Yeah.
What are you most concerned about the world we're leaving the kids?
I think it's going back to the story about when I got my first job, right? I think the world has become so dissected into so detailed, that it's oftentimes unnecessary. When, from a broader perspective, like if I had this ad that was quite general, I responded to it, and I probably, again, wasn't the candidate they're looking for, but it got me an opportunity. And I think today things are so specific that I think we exclude things or exclude ideas, because it is so specific.
I think like Tinder's quite a good example of this, right? Like I was reading some data, and it was apparently you can filter based on height and net income, and so basically sort of, there's, a lot of people looking for those individuals who are over 6 foot and over six figures. And that means sort of 5% of people, that leave sort of some ridiculously like minor percentage. And it's like life is just not a drop down, Actually, it's how you apply experience from one place into another, completely sort of diametrically opposite part of your life that creates, that's the basis of creativity, right?
It's like when we interview people, and I do get involved in the interview process, and it's hard to convey to, the person doing the screening exactly what to look for. She knows what not to look for. So, but I'm not sure if the filters are correct, right? Because my biggest worry is that we've missed someone that could have been a great hire. And we have in the past. We have this great kid. He tried twice, he didn't get in. And somehow he got in. And I told him one day, I said, how did you? He's like, I didn't get in the first 2 times, but he kept trying. And we finally hired him, and he's been a great hire. So sometimes, these filters, you're right, they sort of exclude people that should have otherwise not been excluded.
And Clint, my final question for you.
Okay.
If you had to totally change what you do, what's the career that you never had?
I would open a wine shop. And I would drink all my stock. No, I love wine. I love the idea of winemaking and sort of that ambiance that comes with it. I would definitely open a wine shop.
And I would definitely come and visit. On that note, Clint, thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at Matter Reform, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterreform.com and chat to one of our consultants.